inside this bond for either heart to keep calling it coincidence. The first card rising here is the High Priestess. And wow, that tells me this connection has always had an unseen current running through it. Even when words were missing, even when timing was strange. Even when one of you tried to stay practical, detached, or in control, there has been something intuitive, almost psychic, threading through this whole story. I feel like one of you thinks of the other, and something shifts. One of you pulls away, and the other still feels the echo. One of you goes silent, and the silence itself becomes loud. That is not normal. That is soul electricity, and right beside that, I'm seeing the Two of Cups beautiful. Because this says the recognition is mutual, maybe not always equally expressed, maybe not always equally timed, but mutual. I keep hearing something very clearly. We both know this is bigger than what we planned for. That line lands right in the heart because I feel like both of you may have tried at different moments to put this into a smaller box attraction, timing, curiosity, chemistry, an unfinished lesson, a beautiful distraction, but the bond kept refusing those smaller names. It kept getting under the skin, into the dreams, into the nervous system, into the private emotional world where ordinary connections do not usually live for this long or this deeply. So yes, both of you know now this is not simple, this is not replaceable, and it is definitely not random. The energy around you feels like the star, and I love that so much because it tells me part of what makes this connection so unusual is that it awakens hope and exposure at the same time. There is something about this person that lights you up, but also reveals you, shows you to yourself, makes you aware of what you want, what you fear, what you are ready for, and what you are not willing to pretend about anymore. I feel that both of you have changed simply by being in each other's field. And that is one of the signs of a rare bond. It alters you before it ever fully settles. Then I'm seeing the Wheel of Fortune, and wow, this tells me the connection is not stagnant just because it has been confusing at times. Number, it is moving, turning, becoming. There are cycles inside this story. Timing inside this story, I feel like even the pauses have had purpose. Even the distance has had meaning. Even the moments that felt backwards were quietly pushing both of you toward deeper awareness. Spirit keeps showing me that this connection has been teaching, stretching, and refining both hearts, because something important is trying to come through it. Another message keeps rising strongly. This bond is asking for a higher version of both of you. That feels very important. Because unusual connections do not only bring sweetness, they also bring mirrors, awakenings, reckonings, the demand to stop sleepwalking through love. Then the Lovers appears, and that is such a strong confirmation that what comes next is about choice. Conscious choice, because recognition alone is not the end of the story. Knowing that the bond is rare is not the same as deciding how to honor it. That is why Spirit says, so this is next. What comes next is not more denial, not pretending this is casual, not hiding behind smaller language. What comes next is a choice point, a soul level question. Now that both of you know this is real, what will you do with something this sacred? And Spirit keeps whispering one last thing here. Rare connections are not sent just to be admired from a distance forever. They arrive to transform, to reveal, to call the heart into truth. So the opening message is this. Both of you know now that this bond is not normal, and because that recognition has finally landed, the next step is no longer about guessing what this is. The next step is about whether the two of you are ready to meet it with the honesty, courage, and devotion it has been asking for all along. And I keep seeing the path ahead does not want half love, half trust, or half presence. It wants both hearts standing in the same light, naming what was there, and letting the connection become what it has been trying to become. Together now. This next movement feels charged, intelligent, and impossible to mistake for ordinary attraction. What I'm getting now very strongly is that once two people know a connection is not normal, life does not let them go back to pretending it is. That is where this bond is now. The innocence of maybe it's nothing is over. The comfort of denial is over. Both hearts have crossed into awareness, and awareness changes the road ahead. The first card stepping forward is the Hanged Man, and wow, this tells me what comes next is a shift in perspective that neither of you can avoid anymore. I feel like this connection has already forced pauses, reflection, inner turning, and those moments where everything goes quiet, just so the deeper truth can speak. One or both of you may have tried to rush past what was being shown, but Spirit keeps saying the pause had purpose. The stillness had purpose. It was not punishment. It was revelation. You cannot meet a rare bond with an old way of seeing. And right beside that, I'm seeing temperance. Beautiful because this says the next step is not chaos, not collapse. Not running, not pretending the intensity means the connection is doomed. Number. What comes next is integration, learning how to hold something powerful without breaking it, learning how to let two very different emotional rhythms blend into one sacred timing. I keep hearing something very clearly. This is teaching both of you how to love more truthfully. That line is the heart of this part, because unusual connections are not only exciting, they are refining. They strip away performance, they expose where fear lives, they reveal where old habits cannot survive anymore. The energy around you feels like the Queen of Swords, and I love that so much because it tells me clarity is part of what comes next. Not coldness, clarity. The kind that cuts away false stories, the kind that says, we cannot keep acting like this is casual if it is not. We cannot keep feeding confusion if the bond is asking for honesty. I feel like somebody in this connection is becoming less willing to accept mixed energy, half-truths, or vague emotional wandering. And that is healthy. This bond is too real for fog. Then I'm seeing the Eight of Pentacles. And wow, this says effort is required now. Conscious effort, sacred effort. The next chapter is not meant to live only in telepathy, chemistry, or private knowing. It wants embodiment. It wants showing up. It wants both people asking, how do I care for this? How do I honor this? How do I honor this? How do I stop treating something extraordinary like it will survive on crumbs? Spirit keeps showing me that what is next is craftsmanship of the heart. Another message keeps rising strongly. You cannot keep this connection beautiful by leaving it undefined forever. That lands deeply because there is a temptation with rare bonds to keep them in the realm of mystery, to admire them, to feel them, to romanticize the intensity. But the next step here is not more romanticizing. It is stewardship. Then the Chariot appears, and that is powerful because it tells me movement is necessary now. Not necessarily a giant dramatic leap, but real motion, a choice, a direction. Someone stepping out of emotional passivity and deciding to meet the bond instead of just react to it. I feel like the connection itself is asking for maturity. It is asking for two people to stop circling and start moving toward what they already know. And then the final card stepping forward is Judgment, which is perfect. Because this says the next thing is awakening through action, truth through choice. The moment where the soul says, now that you know, live accordingly. So the message in this next movement is this: what comes next after both of you realize this is not a normal connection, is not more hiding, not more shrinking, not more pretending it can stay suspended forever. What comes next is perspective changing, clarity sharpening, effort deepening, and movement beginning. The bond is asking to be treated like the sacred thing it is. And Spirit keeps whispering one last thing here. Recognition is not the ending, it is the invitation. The real question now is, will both of you rise to meet a connection that has already risen to meet you? Because this kind of bond does not disappear quietly. It waits, it teaches. It calls, and once both hearts know, the next chapter begins asking for truth with both feet on the ground. That is what is opening now. And I keep feeling this too. The connection is done speaking only through signs, dreams, tension, and silence. It wants language, it wants proof, it wants two people brave enough to stop calling destiny complicated when what it really wants is honesty. So the next thing is simple. Even if it feels enormous, the truth gets lived, or it keeps knocking until somebody opens the door. What I'm getting now is that once both of you recognize this bond is not ordinary, the connection begins asking for embodiment. Not fantasy alone, not tension alone, not soul recognition sitting beautifully in the dark with no action attached. Number. What comes next is the hard, holy part, the part where love asks to be lived. The first card stepping forward is the Two of Wands, and wow, this tells me there is a threshold directly in front of this connection. Now, a real one path keeps the bond in longing, wondering, circling, and private intensity. The other path asks for brave movement, clear intention, and the willingness to stop acting like this is something either of you can casually step away from without consequence. I feel one or both of you have been standing at this edge for a while now. Feeling it, sensing it, knowing a decision is coming. I keep hearing something very clearly. This cannot stay half alive. That line lands deeply. Because rare bonds do not fade peacefully when they are starved. They ache, they echo, they return in dreams, thoughts, and strange emotional waves until somebody finally acknowledges that what exists here deserves more than half presence. The energy around you feels like the Queen of Cups, and I love that because it tells me your heart already understands the emotional truth of what is happening. You may feel it in your body, in your intuition, in that inner place where certain connections simply do not feel accidental. Spirit keeps showing me that your sensitivity is not a weakness here. It is a compass. It knows when something is surface level, and it knows when something is soul deep. This one is soul deep. Then I'm seeing the Four of Swords in reverse. And wow, this says the sleeping stage of the connection is ending. The pause cannot stay a pause forever. The hush cannot stay a hush forever. There comes a moment when what has been resting beneath the surface begins to stir too strongly to remain still. That is what this feels like. The bond is waking up from its own suspended state, and once it wakes, it does not want to go back to pretending another message keeps rising strongly. You both have outgrown the version of this that stayed undefined. That matters because there was a version of this bond that could survive on signs, on glances, on emotional undercurrents, on private knowing, but Spirit is saying that version is ending now. The connection wants more room, more honesty, more reality. Then the Six of Wands appears, and I love that here because it tells me what comes next includes visibility, not secrecy, not hidden feeling as the only language, visibility. Acknowledgement, the kind of step that says, yes, this is here. Yes, I see it. Yes, I am willing to stand in it openly. One of the most painful things for a rare connection is when it is deeply felt but never honored in the light. That is changing. The next phase wants witness, and then the Hierophant steps in, which is such a strong confirmation that this bond is moving toward greater definition, greater structure, greater intention. This does not have to mean instant labels tomorrow morning, but it absolutely means the energy is maturing beyond emotional improvisation. There is a sacred seriousness in the field now. I feel like this connection is asking to be treated with reverence, not confusion. So the message in this next movement is this. Now that both of you know this is not a normal connection, what comes next is the crossing point. The threshold where private certainty asks to become lived truth. The pause is ending. The undefined stage is ending. The soul of this bond is asking for more air, more honesty, more visible devotion. And Spirit keeps whispering one last thing here. You are not being called to prove whether the connection is real. You are being called to decide what real love deserves once you know it is there. That is the next thing. Not guessing, not shrinking, not romanticizing from a distance, forever choosing. And once that choosing begins, this bond will stop feeling like a mystery and start feeling like a path, a real one, a living one, a path that only opens when both hearts stop standing at the edge and finally step forward with truth in their hands. And I keep sensing this too. The connection is finished asking for permission to matter. It already matters. What it wants now is courage equal to its depth. So if the days ahead feel louder, if the dreams get stronger, if the pull becomes harder to explain away, that is not your imagination. It is the bond asking to be answered in the language of real life. Not someday, not in theory, not in silence, but in a choice that says, I know what this is and I am ready to meet it. Soon now, for real, at last. What I'm getting here strongly is that this connection is moving out of the phase of private recognition and into the phase of sacred consequence. Because once two people know a bond is not ordinary, the heart stops asking, what is this? And starts asking, what does this require of me now? That is where this energy is standing. Right at the edge of responsibility, right at the edge of truth becoming action. The first card stepping forward is the Lovers. And wow, this says the next thing is not random movement. It is conscious choice. A choice to stop minimizing what has already proven itself too powerful to be casual. A choice to stop pretending that ordinary logic can shrink what the soul has already expanded. One or both of you are being asked to decide whether this bond will keep living in hidden chambers or whether it will be met with real heart, real courage, real presence. I keep hearing something very clearly. This is the moment where feelings become decisions. That line lands deeply. Because until now, much may have lived in glances, timing, distance, intuition, pull, silence, returning thoughts, and that unmistakable inner knowing. But Spirit is showing me that the bond is no longer content to exist as pure atmosphere. It wants shape. The energy around you feels like the Empress, and I love that because it tells me your role in this connection has never been small. You may be the one who naturally feels the emotional truth first, or the one whose presence makes everything more honest simply by existing, or the one who has had to hold yourself with dignity while the connection moved through unusual stages. Whatever your exact position has been, Spirit is saying your energy has been teaching this bond what depth, grace, and real value look like. That matters now, because what comes next will be shaped by what each person believes this connection deserves. Then I'm seeing the Knight of Pentacles, and wow, this tells me the next step may not be reckless, dramatic chaos. It may be deliberate, measured, grounded, something chosen with care. Rare connections do not always need louder noise. Sometimes they need cleaner intention. A move that says, I am not here to play with something sacred, I am here to honor it properly. I feel a seriousness in the field now. Another message keeps rising strongly. The next thing is not fantasy, it is follow through. That one matters so much because once the soul recognizes the rarity, the heart has to decide whether it will behave in a way that matches that recognition. Then the Sunday appears, and this is beautiful because it says what comes next wants openness. Fresh air. Visibility, the bond does not want to keep hiding in half-light forever. It wants warmth, honesty, the relief of being seen clearly for what it is. I feel this strongly. One of the biggest changes ahead is that this connection becomes harder to keep tucked away behind vague language. The truth wants daylight now. The feeling wants witness now. And then the final card stepping forward is the Four of Wands, perfect. Because this tells me the next phase carries anchoring energy, not only intensity, not only longing, not only we feel something huge. It carries the potential for grounded closeness, emotional arrival, and the sense that something long circling finally has a place to land. This is why Spirit keeps saying the connection is asking for more than admiration now. It is asking for embodiment, a real place in life, a real structure in the heart. So the message in this next movement is this. Now that both of you know this is not a normal connection, what comes next is choice becoming form. The bond is moving toward clarity, steadiness, and the kind of honest step that says, I will no longer treat this as if it is accidental. The mystery is not disappearing, but it is asking to be carried into real life with more reverence and less fear. And Spirit keeps whispering one last thing here. A rare connection does not come into your life only to be felt. It comes to ask whether you are willing to become someone who can hold it well. That is the threshold now, not do we feel it. You already do. The real question is, who is ready to live like they know? Because the path ahead is not built from denial anymore. It is built from response, from devotion, from the first real step that proves the soul recognition was never just a beautiful secret, but the beginning of something that intends to stay. And I keep feeling this too. The next chapter does not want to be poetic only. It wants to be lived, touched, named. Given room, that is why the energy feels so full. Because the bond itself is leaning forward, waiting to see which heart will answer first. What I'm seeing here is that the connection has reached the stage where inner knowing is no longer enough by itself. The soul has already recognized, the heart has already reacted, the body has already felt the pull. Now something deeper is asking for response, not performance, not panic. Response, because once two people know a bond is unusual, meaningful, and impossible to reduce into ordinary language, the next thing that happens is pressure, sacred pressure. The kind that asks, will you meet what you know? The first card stepping forward is the Chariot. And wow, this tells me motion is part of the next chapter, real motion, not the circling kind. Not the almost kind, not the emotional back and forth that looks alive from far away but never actually crosses the distance. Spirit is showing me a heart getting ready to move with purpose. I feel that one of you, or maybe both in different ways, has reached the point where standing still inside this bond no longer feels wise, it feels costly. I keep hearing something very clearly. This has to go somewhere now. That line lands deeply, because what it means is simple. The feeling has become too real to keep living in a half-life, too deep to remain suspended, too alive to stay unnamed forever. The energy around you feels like the Queen of Wands. And I love that because it tells me your presence is part of what keeps calling this connection forward. There is something in your energy that refuses to let the bond shrink. You may not even be trying, but your fire, your depth, your magnetism, your refusal to be emotionally fake, all of that keeps the truth bright. It keeps the connection from falling asleep. Spirit keeps showing me that around you, the unusual nature of this bond becomes impossible to deny. Then I'm seeing the Eight of Pentacles, and this is important, because it says what comes next is not only emotional, it is intentional, crafted. Someone is beginning to understand that rare love does not survive on awe alone. It needs effort. Presence, follow through, a willingness to learn what the bond asks for instead of assuming intensity alone is enough. That realization is maturing the whole field. Now, another message keeps rising strongly. The next step is not to feel more. The next step is to do more. That one matters, because I think both hearts have already felt enough to know this is not normal. The question now is who is willing to become honest enough, brave enough, and steady enough to match the depth of it. Then the star appears, and wow, this tells me what comes next also carries healing. Hope, restoration, the bond is not moving forward simply to create more chaos. It is moving toward alignment. I feel like once the next real step is taken, something inside both of you relaxes. Not because all mystery disappears, but because the connection is no longer being starved of truth. There is relief in that. Real relief, and then the final card stepping forward is Judgment Perfect. Because this says the next chapter begins with a call being answered, the soul's call, the heart's call, the truth's call. So the message in this next movement is this. Now that both of you know this is not a normal connection, what comes next is movement shaped by purpose, effort shaped by honesty, and a real chance for the bond to step out of emotional suspension and into lived reality. The feeling has already proved itself. Now life is asking for evidence that the people inside the bond are willing to honor what they know. And Spirit keeps whispering one last thing here. This connection is no longer standing at the door asking, "Do you feel me?" It is asking, will you answer me? That is the difference. That is the shift. That is why the atmosphere feels so full now, because recognition was only the beginning. The next sacred act is response. And maybe that is the deepest message here. What comes next is not chance. It is consequence. The natural consequence of two souls recognizing something rare and no longer pretending smaller ways of loving can satisfy them. So if the air feels charged, if dreams feel louder, if the pull feels steadier, trust that something is preparing to become real. Not someday, not only in theory, but soon enough that the heart is already making room. This last movement feels sacred, undeniable, and already in motion. What I'm getting here more than anything is that this connection has passed the stage of curiosity, fascination, emotional confusion, and recognition. It has entered destiny with consequences, not in a frightening way, in a real way. The kind of real that asks two hearts to stop standing outside the fire describing its warmth, and finally step close enough to be changed by it. The first card stepping forward is the World, and wow, this tells me something is completing now. A cycle of uncertainty, a season of circling, a chapter where the connection was felt deeply but not fully lived. Spirit keeps showing me that both of you have learned what this bond needed to teach through distance, timing, silence, tension, longing, and soul recognition. And because that learning has happened, a new threshold opens. The bond does not want to remain in the old chapter. It wants to move into the next one with greater truth. I keep hearing something clearly. What happens next will not feel accidental. That line lands deeply. Because this says the next phase is not random chemistry floating through the air. It is response. It is decision. It is destiny becoming practical. The energy around you feels like the Empress, and I love that so much because it tells me your presence has been one of the great awakeners in this connection. You may have brought this person face to face with their own heart, face to face with the standard of love they can no longer unlearn, face to face with the reality that something rare asks for a different level of honesty. Spirit keeps showing me that you are not only part of the bond, you are part of the transformation the bond caused, that I'm seeing the King of Pentacles, and this is important because it says what comes next wants grounding, not only intensity, not only soul language, not only all the beautiful invisible things, those matter, yes, but the next chapter wants embodiment. Showing up, keeping promises, creating a container strong enough to hold a connection this unusual. That is why the energy feels mature. It is no longer saying, look how powerful this is. It is saying, now build accordingly. Another message keeps rising strongly. This bond cannot be fed with crumbs anymore. That one matters so much. Because both of you know now what this is, which means both of you also know what it is not. It is not casual. It is not disposable. It is not something the heart can dip in and out of without cost. It is not meant to survive forever on half-truths, half-presence, or half-courage. Then the Sunday appears, and wow, that tells me what comes next carries openness, warmth, and the relief of no longer having to hide from what is obvious in the soul. I feel a brightening here, a release from the old strain. Not because every question vanishes instantly, but because the bond begins breathing in daylight instead of trying to survive in shadow. There is life in that, ease in that, joy in that. And then the final card stepping forward is the Hierophant Perfect. Because this says the direction ahead is deeper commitment to truth, greater integrity. A more sacred handling of the bond for some of you. Yes, this can point to formal commitment energy one day. But first and foremost, it speaks of alignment. The kind of alignment where actions begin matching soul knowledge. That is what this connection has been moving toward all along. So the deepest message in this final movement is this. Now that both of you know this is not a normal connection, what comes next is no longer more guessing. It is the beginning of alignment, embodiment, and the kind of serious response rare love always asks for eventually. The old chapter closes, the new one opens. And what makes it beautiful is that the next step is not being pushed by fantasy. It is being called forward by truth. And Spirit keeps whispering one last thing here. Some connections enter your life to be remembered. Some enter your life to awaken you. And some enter your life to be chosen. That is this one. That is why it would not let either of you stay asleep. That is why it kept returning. That is why it kept intensifying. That is why it kept asking both hearts to rise. Because the bond was never asking, can you feel me? It was asking, will you honor me? And now the answer is getting closer to lived form. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Take care. And if your spirit has been sensing a final shift, if something in you already knew the connection could not stay suspended forever, if the silence has started to feel less like distance and more like a breath being held, trust that the breath is almost over. The heart is almost done waiting, and the next chapter is almost ready to be lived. Confusion and recognition. It has entered destiny with consequences, not in a frightening way, in a real way. The kind of real that asks two hearts to stop standing outside the fire describing its warmth, and finally step close enough to be changed by it. The first card stepping forward is the World. And wow, this tells me something is completing now. A cycle of uncertainty. A season of circling, a chapter where the connection was felt deeply but not fully lived. Spirit keeps showing me that both of you have learned what this bond needed to teach through distance, timing, silence, tension, longing, and soul recognition. And because that learning has happened, a new threshold opens. The bond does not want to remain in the old chapter. It wants to move into the next one with greater truth. I keep hearing something clearly. What happens next will not feel accidental. That line lands deeply. Because this says the next phase is not random chemistry floating through the air. It is response. It is decision. It is destiny becoming practical. The energy around you feels like the Empress, and I love that so much because it tells me your presence has been one of the great awakeners in this connection. You may have brought this person face to face with their own heart, face to face with the standard of love they can no longer unlearn, face to face with the reality